The evenings here have a way of pulling a man into silence. I sit on the wide veranda of my coastal home, the air heavy with salt, the sound of waves rolling endlessly below. The horizon burns in shades of orange and purple as the sun drifts. Down into the Atlantic, a painting only nature could create. For years, this very spot was shared between Veronica and me. We would sit side by side, sipping wine and talking about the little things that made up our days. Her work at the hospital, my lectures at the university, plans for Isabella's future. Now there is no soft laugh beside me, no hand resting lightly on mine. Only me, a glass of whiskey in place of the wine, and memories that weigh heavier than the tide. Bartlett's has never been a place for everyone. It was meant for those who dared, who reached higher than most. When Veronica and I bought a plot of land here 35 years ago, we were young dreamers. She was just beginning her journey as a heart surgeon, and I was an ambitious economics professor trying to prove myself. We had no business buying here, not by the standards of others, but we did it anyway. It wasn't only an investment in land. It was an investment in who we believed we were becoming. Today, the Prescott Mansion is known across this little community. A house of stone and glass, rising 3 stories, looking straight into the vast ocean. A private walkway winds down to the sand, and the gardens still bloom with Veronica's design, though her hands haven't touched them in years. My chair creaks as I run my fingers along the polished mahogany armrest she once picked out with such care. Time and sea salt have cracked the surface. So have the years cracked me. It has been 3 long years since she left me behind. Pancreatic cancer took her swiftly, cruelly. For a woman who spent her life saving hearts, it was bitter irony that her own life was stolen by a part of the body she had never mastered. "You need to slow down, Elliot," she used to warn me on the rare nights we were both at home. "Life is slipping by." But I brushed her off, hiding in research, in teaching, in the applause of conferences and book sales. My career flourished. Harvard praised my theories. Students respected my devotion. My books carried my name far beyond campus walls. Yet in all that noise, I missed the most important music of my life: Veronica's quiet sorrow and Isabella's childhood. When the diagnosis came, I tried to make up for it by stepping back, taking time away from work, but it was already too late. Too late for dinners, for long walks, for the little conversations that would have built a stronger bridge between us. Veronica forgave me, or at least she said she did. Isabella never has. At her mother's funeral, my daughter's voice cut sharper than any scalpel her mother had ever held. "You always chose your damn job," she spat at me. "Even now you're thinking about your next lecture, aren't you?" I stood there hollowed by grief, yet her words pierced deeper than my sorrow. Perhaps she was right. I missed her school plays, her soccer matches, her graduation. I could recite graphs and theories better than I could recall the names of her friends. I wasn't there, not when it mattered. Since the funeral, what we've had is not a relationship. It's been a cold war. Isabella built a life in New York, working at an art gallery that caters to wealthy collectors. She would call me once a month, but always with a reason. Rent, travel for exhibitions, professional expenses. I always wrote the checks. It was easier to pay than to push. Easier to keep my distance than to fail at closing the gap. Soon the calls thinned out, once every 2 months, then 6. The last time we spoke was Christmas more than a year ago. She claimed the gallery had an important exhibition. I knew it wasn't true. Their website showed nothing of the sort. Still, I stayed silent, swallowing the lie as I sat alone in this mansion built for family. Christmas passed with the clink of ice in my glass instead of laughter around the table. 2 years ago, I left Harvard and settled here for good. Boston's townhouse was full of shadows of what used to be, while this house at least gave me the sea. The neighbors are a mixture of retirees and families who appear only in the summer months. In the small town nearby, the bookseller knows me by name, and the barista at the cafe smiles when she sees me. The gulls scream each morning as if to remind me I'm still alive, and the waves lull me into sleep when the day finally drains me. This mansion, this monument of stone and memory, was Veronica's and my greatest shared project. We found the ice-mid land during one of our rare escapes from work. She fell in love with the view, and I, ever practical, with the property's worth. Together we built the house, arguing playfully over designs. She demanded open windows that let the sea in. I wanted a study with the perfect view for writing. We made sure the space could hold family, though in truth we rarely gathered as one. Still, it was ours. Every floor tells a story. The first with its open rooms flowing together, the second with bedrooms and my office, and the third crowned with a terrace that opens the night sky like a theater curtain. Veronica adored lying there on warm evenings, naming constellations I never bothered to learn until it was too late. Now, most of it is silent. The art we collected together still hangs on the walls, paintings from Italy, sculptures she loved. Photographs of our happiest moments. Our wedding, Isabella as a newborn, trips when she was a girl, Veronica's proud day as head of cardiac surgery, pictures frozen in time, mocking me with all we had yet all we lost. We had everything people dream about, respect, wealth, a daughter with talent and promise, and yet we let it slip. Or maybe I let it slip. Perhaps I became too much like my own father, a man who thought love was best expressed in money rather than presence. I sipped the whiskey, feeling it burn down, almost punishing me. The sun is nearly gone now, leaving only a faint edge of light before the night claims it all. I tell myself to go inside, cook something simple, maybe read, maybe write a little. Tomorrow will mirror today, just as today mirrored yesterday. My life has become a pattern carved deep, without change. I start to rise when a sound stops me. My cell phone vibrating against the small table. The number glowing on the screen is unfamiliar. I almost let it pass. Too many calls from scammers target men my age. But something, perhaps loneliness, perhaps instinct, pushes me to answer. I clear my throat, slipping unconsciously into the deep, firm tone that once hushed entire lecture, halls. Elliot Prescott, I announce. For a moment there is silence. Then, a voice I know too well, even after so much distance. Dad, Isabella. My heart jolts, a tangle of joy, fear, and suspicion. The last time she called out of schedule, it was for money after a car accident. I steady my tone, hiding the storm inside. Isabella, what a surprise. Yes, I know I haven't called in a while, she replies evenly, without a trace of apology. I let the quiet stretch, giving her the space to say why she has broken this silence now. Above me, the first stars prick the darkening sky. I have news, she says at last. Something in her voice makes me stiffen. It is not the soft warmth of a daughter eager to share her happiness. No, it is the clipped, businesslike tone of someone negotiating terms. I've gotten married. The words hit me harder than I expected. Married. My own daughter married, and I didn't even know she was seeing someone. My lips move automatically. Congratulations. I swallow. When was the wedding? Last weekend. A small ceremony with close friends. Close friends. Not her father. Something twists inside me, but I force my voice steady. I see. And who's the lucky man? His name is Hayden Bennett, a financial consultant. We met at an art opening 6 months ago. 6 months. She met him only half a year ago, and she didn't tell me a word, not even in our last Christmas. Call. I nod, though she cannot see me and speak words that feel hollow in my mouth. Sounds wonderful. I'm happy for you, Isabella. There is a pause, and in that pause I know. The real reason for this call hasn't been spoken yet. Indeed. "We're planning a honeymoon," she says in the same businesslike tone. And I was thinking about a house on the coast. Of course, she wasn't thinking about me. She was thinking about a house. A luxury mansion with a private beach and an ocean view. The perfect place for a romantic getaway. The property, not the father. "Do you want to honeymoon at my house?" I ask, emphasizing the word my because it really is my house. Veronica and I bought it together, but after she died, it became my sole property. No, it's a family home, Daddy," she says with a touch of irritation in her voice. "And no one lives there now but you. You have an apartment in the city, don't you?" "I do have a small apartment in Boston that I rent out to graduate students, but that has nothing to do with the case. And the fact that she thinks like she can just take my house for her honeymoon without even inviting me to the wedding speaks volumes." "When are you planning on coming?" I ask, still trying to keep my tone neutral. "This Friday," she answers, as if it's the most natural thing in the world. "For 2 weeks. Can you leave your keys at Mrs. Campbell's across the street? We'll bet her late tonight." Mrs. Campbell, my neighbor, whom Isabella barely knows. I'm squeezing the phone harder than I should. "Don't you want me to meet your husband first?" I ask, trying to make it sound like a sincere suggestion rather than a reproach. The pause on the other end of the line is too long. "We're going to be very busy, Dad. Maybe at the end of our stay we can meet for dinner or something like that, as if meeting Dad is an insignificant item on our schedule that can be crammed in between the beach and shopping. I stare out at the dark sea in front of me and think about all the times I've set aside time with my family for work, about all those dinners I missed, about all those school plays I wasn't at, about all those conversations Isabel and I never had. Maybe it's my fault that my daughter grew up with the belief that relationships and people are less important than careers and possessions. Perhaps I taught her that by my example. But now, sitting alone on the veranda of a house that should have been filled with life and laughter, not silence and memories, I can feel something inside me breaking. Or maybe it's the other way around. Something is falling into place. "Isabella," I say quietly, "I think we need to talk before you arrive. Maybe you could come a day early without Hayden so we could daddy." She interrupts me. That note of impatience in her voice that I know all too well. "I really don't have time for this. I just want to know if you're going to leave the keys with Mrs. Campbell or not." I close my eyes and take a deep breath. I once loved that voice more than anything in the world. The first word my daughter uttered was, "Daddy." I remember her running to me with open arms when I came home from university. I remember her sitting on my lap while I read her bedtime stories. I remember her first day of school, her first broken knee, her first broken heart. And now she calls me after a year of silence to tell me she got married without me and demands the keys to my house for her honeymoon. "Okay," I finally say. "I'll leave the keys with Mrs. Campbell." "Great." Her voice, suddenly, becomes lighter as if she's finally gotten what she wanted. "Thanks, Daddy. I'll call you when we get there." I know she won't call. Just like she didn't call on my birthday last month. Just like she didn't call on the anniversary of Veronica's death. Just like she didn't call just to see how I was doing. "Yeah, sure," I say. "Have a great honeymoon, thank you. Bye, Daddy." And she hangs up without waiting for me to answer. I sit in the dark, phone in hand, staring at the black ocean in front of me. The waves crash against the shore with an even rhythm, as if nothing has happened, as if the world hadn't changed. But something has changed in me. I can feel the old pain giving way to something new, something like determination. I smile into the darkness and whisper, "Goodbye, Isabella." Then I finish my whiskey in one gulp and rise to enter the house. The phone call with Isabella stayed in my head all night. I tossed and turned in bed, going over in my mind her words, her intonation, and what she didn't say. I got married. 3 simple words that should have brought joy to my father. Instead, they left a bitter taste, as if I had been excluded from the most important event in the life of my only child. In the morning, I sat in the kitchen, staring at a cup of cooled coffee. Outside the large windows, I could see the ocean. Choppy. Today, with gray waves crashing against the shore. The weather matched my mood. My cell phone was on the table in front of me. I dialed Isabella's number, the one she'd called from yesterday. 3 beeps and she answered, Dad." I could hear the surprise in her voice. Had something happened? Her first thought was, something must have happened. Not that I could just want to talk to my daughter. No, nothing happened, I replied, trying to keep my voice sounding calm and friendly. I just thought we could talk about your wedding. You caught me off guard yesterday. Pause. I heard background noise, the sounds of the street. New York never sleeps. I'm a little busy right now, Dad. Can we talk about this later? Later when? Isabella? I couldn't hide the slight irritation in my voice. You call me once a year, tell me you're married, and demand the keys to the house. I think you can spare your father 5 minutes. Another pause, then a sigh. Okay, 5 minutes. I heard the background noise change. She must have gone into some kind of room, a cafe, her office in the gallery, or maybe her new family home, which I knew nothing about. Tell me about Hayden, I asked, taking a sip of my iced coffee. He's wonderful, she said in the way people usually talked about their new partners. Smart, ambitious, with a great sense of humor. I met him at the opening of Renzo Martinez's exhibition. I hadn't heard of that artist, I admitted. Honeymoon. Of course you haven't, she said with that subtle note of superiority in her voice that always hurt me. He's a rising star in contemporary art. Hayden advised him financially, and I organized his first solo show in New York. I see, I said, though the only thing I really understood was that my daughter still thought I was hopelessly disconnected from the modern world. And you dated for 6 months before the wedding? Almost, her voice softened. When you know it's the right person, why wait? I remembered how I'd met Veronica at a faculty meeting. She was a guest speaker talking about new methods of cardiac surgery. I asked a question after her talk, something about the cost-effectiveness of new technologies in healthcare. She answered with such passion and at the same time clarity of thought that I was fascinated. We started dating, and 2 years later we were married. There was no one rushing us. I'm just surprised you didn't introduce him to me before the wedding, I said carefully, trying not to sound accusatory. We've both been very busy, Dad. Her voice became strained. Besides, you know how it is in the art world. Things happen fast, so fast that you couldn't invite your father to the wedding. That's it. I wasn't going to ask the question so directly, but the words came out. Silence on the other end of the line. Then it was a very private ceremony, only the closest of friends. I understand, I said, and suddenly felt tired. And I'm not part of that circle. Dad, let's not start. Her voice became hard. You chose your own path years ago. You always put work before family. Even when Mom was dying, it was a low blow, but not unexpected. Isabella always used Veronica's death as a weapon against me. Yes, I worked too hard. Yes, I missed a lot of important moments, but in the last months of Veronica's life, I was there for her every day. I took a whole semester off when your mother got sick, I said quietly. Too late, she cut me off. It's always too late. We'd been through this conversation many times before, and it always ended the same way, with mutual recriminations and more estrangement. I decided to change the subject. How does Hayden feel about you not inviting your father to the wedding? Long pause. Too long. Hayden, she stammered. And it was so unlike Mileway's confident daughter. Hayden thinks you gave up on me after Mom died. I felt a cold wave roll through my body. What? He was embarrassed to ask why my father wasn't at the wedding. She continued hurriedly. His parents died when he was a teenager, and he's very sensitive about family matters. I didn't want to upset him with stories about our difficulties. So you lied to him, It wasn't a question. I made it easy. Her voice became defensive. Told him that you chose not to be involved in my life after Mom died. That you chose to completely immerse yourself in your work and avoid anything that reminded you of her, including me. I squeezed the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Isabella hadn't just uninvited me to the wedding. She'd portrayed me as a monster in her husband's eyes. A man who abandoned his own daughter in her time of need. You know that's not true, I said, surprised at how calm my voice sounded given the storm raging inside me. It's my truth, Daddy, she replied with the confidence that had always been her hallmark. You may think otherwise, but I remember how it was, the way things were. After Veronica died, I really immersed myself in my work. It was my way of coping with grief. I wrote a new book, spent more time with students, took extra lectures, but gave up on Isabella. I called her every week. I offered to let her live with me, but she preferred to stay in New York. I sent her money, not because I wanted to pay her off, but because he wanted to help. But in her version of the story, I was the cold, distant father who abandoned her when she needed support the most. Isabella, I began, trying to find the words that would break through the wall she'd built between us. I never, Daddy. My 5 minutes are up, she interrupted me. I have to go. Are you going to leave your keys with Mrs. Campbell or not? I closed my eyes. Images flashed before my mind. Isabella as a child sitting on my shoulders as I walked along the beach. Isabella as a teenager rolling her eyes at my attempts to talk about her first date. Isabella as a student showing me her first publication in an art magazine. Isabella at her mother's funeral, standing apart from me as if we were strangers. And now Isabella, marrying without me and telling her husband the lie that I had abandoned her. When did it all go wrong? When did my little girl, who once looked up to me with adoration, turn into a woman for whom I was only an inconvenient reminder of the past? Or perhaps a source of funding and real estate to use as she saw fit? I remembered how our relationship had begun to deteriorate even before Veronica's illness. Isabella had always been closer to her mother. Veronica understood the art world. I did not. Veronica knew how to talk about feelings. I didn't. Veronica supported all of Isabella's creative endeavors. I worried about the practicality of her choices. When Isabella decided not to apply to Harvard, despite my connections that might have made her path easier, and instead chose an art school in New York, I was disappointed. Not because I thought her choice was wrong, but because it meant she would be further away from us, from me. I didn't know how to express those feelings, so they morphed into lectures about financial security and career prospects. After Veronica's death, the crack between us turned into a chasm. Isabella accused me of not being an attentive enough husband, that if I'd spent more time at home, maybe we would have noticed the symptoms sooner. That even at the funeral, I was worried about how soon I could go back to work. It was an unfair characterization, but I wasn't defensive. Maybe somewhere deep down inside, I was afraid she was right. Maybe I really had let Veronica down and Isabella. Over the years, our infrequent conversations became increasingly strained. Isabella only called when she needed something. Money to rent a gallery, contacts in the art world, a letter of recommendation for a grant. I always gave her what she asked for, hoping it would somehow shorten the distance between us, but it only increased it. And now she calls after a year of silence to tell me she's married and wants to use my house for her honeymoon. The house I built with her mother, the house that had witnessed so many happy moments and was now a refuge for my loneliness. Dash. Dad, are you still there? Her voice brought me back to reality. Yes, I answered. I'm here. So, you'll leave the keys? I stared out the window at the ocean. The waves were crashing against the shore with regularity. The ebb and flow, rise and fall. Nature knows no resentment or disappointment, it simply follows its eternal cycles. Of course, I said at last. I'll leave them with Mrs. Campbell. Good. Her voice instantly became more cheerful. Thank you, Daddy. You don't know how much this means to us. Hayden always wanted a house by the ocean. Well, this is it. Not just a honeymoon, but to impress her new husband. Show him that she comes from a family that owns luxury beachfront real estate, that she has access to a lifestyle he may have dreamed of. Tell me, Isabella, the words flew from my lips. Does Hayden know I own the house, or did you tell him it was yours? A long pause. Then I told him that it's our family home. Her voice became cautious, that it would pass to me after I die. She'd already distributed my inheritance, already promised my house to her new husband. I see, I said, surprised at my own calmness. And when do you plan to come? This Friday night, she said, clearly pleased by the change of subject. We'll stay for 2 weeks. Will you be in town by then? Maybe, I said, uncertainly. I have some things to do in Boston. Oh, well. There was no disappointment or relief in her voice, just neutral acceptance of the fact. Maybe we can meet for dinner before we leave. I'd like you to meet Hayden after you've already painted him a portrait of a monster father abandoning his daughter. After you promised him my house as an inheritance. I doubted this meeting would be pleasant for either Ophis. We'll see how my schedule works out, I replied. Sure, she agreed easily. Just let me know. It was as if we were business partners arranging a meeting, not father and daughter who hadn't seen each other in over a year. Isabella, I said, and something in my voice silenced her. I want you to know that I never gave up on you. I've always been here. I always will be. Silence on the other end of the line. Then I really have to go now, Dad. Thanks for the keys. I'll call you when we get there. And she hung up without waiting for my response. Like always, I put the phone down on the table and stared at it for a long time. Something inside me had broken completely. Maybe the last thread of hope that Isabella and I would ever repair our relationship. Maybe the illusion that she valued me as a father and not just a source of financial support in real estate. In that moment, I made a decision. I'm not going to play this game anymore. I won't pretend everything is okay when it isn't. I won't let Isabella use me and then discard me when I'm no longer needed. I got up from the table and walked over to the window. The ocean was still as choppy as ever, the waves crashing against the shore with a fury that reflected my inner state. I gazed at this primal force of nature for a long time, and gradually my resolve strengthened. If Isabella wants the house for her honeymoon, if she has already promised it to her husband as part of her inheritance, if she has lied to him about me abandoning her, fine. I'll give her a lesson she'll never forget. I picked up the phone and dialed a number. Seaside Estates, real estate agency, how may I help you? Came the female voice on the other end of the line. My name is Elliot Prescott, I said. I'd like to talk about the possibility of renting out my seaside home. Of course, Mr. Prescott. When would you like to start, and for how long? I smiled, looking out at the ocean, immediately, and for the long term. After talking to Isabella, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. She sent tone message after another. First about what groceries to buy for their arrival, then asking about the condition of the house, then asking me to check if the hot tub on the terrace was working, as if I were the caretaker of her private resort, not the father she hadn't invited to her own wedding. I didn't respond to any of those messages. Instead, I put the phone screen down and got down to business. The morning after our conversation began with a visit to the Seaside Estates Real Estate Agency. The office was located in downtown Bartlett in an old building overlooking the harbor. I was greeted by Caroline Duval, the agency's director, an elegant woman in her 50s with a keen eye and an impeccable reputation in the world of luxury real estate. Mr. Prescott, she shook my hand with perfect pressure, neither too strong nor too weak. We've heard a lot about your house, though we never expected you'd want to rent it out. Life circumstances change, Mrs. Duval, I replied, sitting down in the chair across from her desk. Please call me Caroline, she smiled. Dash, tell me more about your property and what you expect from the lease. I described the house, 3 stories, 5 bedrooms, a private beach, a garden that had once been Veronica's pride, and a rooftop terrace overlooking the ocean. He mentioned that he wanted to rent it as soon as possible, preferably this week, and for the long term. That's an unusual situation, Caroline said, making notes in her notebook. Usually, such properties take time to prepare marketing materials, professional photography. I'm willing to offer a competitive price for a quick transaction, I interrupted her. And I'm sure you have clients in your base who've been looking for something like this. She looked at me carefully, and I saw understanding in her eyes. Caroline didn't. Ask why I was in a hurry, another quality I appreciated. Actually, I have potential tenants who might be interested, she said after a pause. The Richardson family. Oliver Richardson, ISA diplomat. Recently returned to the States after serving overseas for many years. They were looking for a house in your neighborhood, preferably with an ocean view. They'd like to rent it for a year with an option to renew. That sounds perfect, I nodded. They're very wealthy people with an impeccable reputation, Caroline continued. They have 2 teenage children who will be attending a private school nearby. I can arrange a meeting today if you're ready. I'm more than ready, I replied. The sooner the better. Caroline nodded and reached for the phone. Give me a few minutes to get in touch with them. In the meantime, perhaps you would like to discuss the financial details. We spent the next hour discussing rent, deposits, insurance, and other nuances of a long-term lease. The price Caroline offered was even higher than I'd expected, apparently. Real estate on the Massachusetts coast was even more valuable than when Veronica and I had bought a lot there. By noon, everything was organized. The Bob Richardson family agreed to come over for a home inspection at 3 in the afternoon. I had just enough time to get home and prepare for their visit. On the way home, I reflected on what I was doing. Part of me felt guilty, not for Isabella, but for Veronica's memory. We had built this house together, dreaming that it would become a family gathering place, that our grandchildren would run along the beach, collecting shells, learning to swim in the sheltered cove. But instead, the house became another battleground in our Cold War with our daughter. A place where I've spent the last few years alone, poring over memories and regrets. Maybe renting it out isn't an act of revenge, but an act of liberation for me and for a home that deserved to hear children's laughter and see family celebrations. Upon returning home, I began to quickly prepare for the arrival of potential tenants. I removed personal photos from the walls and shelves. I didn't want strangers looking at moments of my life with Veronica and Isabella. Gathered the stack of books I wanted to take with me. Packed up a few particularly valuable pieces of art that Veronica and I had acquired during our rare trips together. My phone continued to vibrate with new messages from Isabella. Now she was asking if there were fresh linens in the house or if she needed to bring her own. I continued to ignore them. At exactly 3 hours in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. The Richardson family was there. Oliver, a tall man with a military bearing and kind eyes. His wife, Eleanor, a refined woman who reminded me of Veronica with her understated elegance, and their children, 17-year-old Alexander and 15-year-old Sophie. Standing next to them was Caroline Duval, who introduced us to each other. "It's an honor, Professor Prescott," Oliver said, shaking my hand. "I read your work on behavioral economics when I was at Princeton. That was a long time ago." I smiled, surprised and flattered by the recognition. "Good ideas don't get old," he replied. I gave them a tour of the house, showing them the spacious rooms overlooking the ocean, the rooftop terrace, the garden that still bore traces of Veronica's care, though I wasn't as diligent a gardener as she was. The Richardson children were polite and reserved, but I saw Sophie's eyes light up when she saw the terrace and Alexander's interest in the built-in library in the study. "This is exactly what we were looking for," Eleanor said when we returned to the living room. "Space, light, closeness to nature." After so many years in urban apartments all over the world, children deserve a little freedom. I'm glad you like it, I said. The house deserves a family who will appreciate it. We discussed the details when they could move in, what was included, in the rent, what rules I wanted to set for the house. To my surprise, the Richardsons were ready to move in immediately. They were temporarily living in a hotel and looking for permanent housing. If you agree, we could sign the contract today and organize the move in 2 days, Min Oliver suggested. It was quicker than I'd expected, but it fit perfectly with my plans. Friday, the day Isabella planned to arrive with her new husband, was in 3 days. I agree, I replied. The sooner the better. Carolyn, who had been watching us silently all this time, pulled the prepared contract out of her briefcase. Oliver and I studied it carefully, made a few minor adjustments, and signed it. With the Richardsons and Caroline gone, I was alone in the house that would soon cease to be my home, if only temporarily. I stood at the window looking out at the ocean and felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, determination, and something akin to contentment. My phone vibrated again. This time it was Isabella calling. I didn't answer it. Instead, I went to my bedroom and began packing my bags. The next 2 days passed in feverish activity. I was moving personal belongings into my apartment in Boston, which I hadn't used in years. Fortunately, I wasn't renting it out as I had previously planned, but just holding it as an investment. Now, it turned out to be providential. The apartment was smaller than I remembered. 2 bedrooms, a living room overlooking the park, a small kitchen, but it was mine. And it didn't have the ghosts of the past that haunted me in the house on the coast. Isabella kept calling and texting. At one point, her tone changed from demanding to concerned. Daddy, why aren't you answering? Is everything okay? Daddy, I'm worried. Please let me know you're okay. If you don't answer by tomorrow, I'll call the police. That last threat almost made me answer. Almost. But I knew she was bluffing. Isabella wouldn't call the police. It would mean wasting time and possibly derailing her honeymoon plans. Instead, she would probably just arrive on Friday as planned, expecting Mrs. Campbell to have the keys as promised. I gathered all of Veronica's pictures, the ones of her alone and the ones of us together. I collected her jewelry that I'd kept over the years, hoping to pass it on to Isabella someday. I collected family heirlooms, the silver service Veronica had, inherited from her grandmother, the collection of rare medical books she'd collected all her life, the antique watch I'd given her on our 20th anniversary. All of this I carefully packed and moved into the apartment. The Richardsons didn't mind keeping the furniture and basic household items in the house. It made the rent more attractive to them and saved me from having to move everything out, but the personal valuable items I took. As I packed and packed, my thoughts kept returning to Isabella and our relationship. We were once close. I remember reading her bedtime stories, teaching her to ride her bike, being proud of her first drawings. When she was little, I was her hero. But then something changed. Maybe it was when she became a teenager and started to distance herself from me as so many kids her age do. Maybe it was when she went away to study and discovered that the world was much bigger and more interesting than her old-fashioned father. Or maybe it happened gradually, day by day, year by year, as I missed important parts of her life because of my job. I found a box of her childhood drawings that Veronica had cherished. One of them was a picture of our family. 3 figures holding hands with a big sun above them, and the words, "I love Mommy and Daddy," written in jagged, childish handwriting. I stared at that drawing for a long time, trying to remember the girl who drew it and to understand how she had turned into the woman who was using me for her own purposes, because that's what had been happening all these years. Isabella only called when she needed something. Rent money, contacts in the art world, recommendations for work. And I always gave her what she asked for, hoping it would somehow make up for my absence from her childhood, my emotional detachment, My inability to be the kind of father my own father had been. Stern, but always present. Now she wanted my house. For her honeymoon, the house I had built with her mother, the house where she had spent the summer vacations of her childhood collecting shells on the beach and building sandcastles. The house that she had, by her own admission, already promised to her husband as part of her future inheritance. But this time, I wasn't going to give in. This time, I was going to teach her a lesson about the consequences of her actions. By Thursday evening, everything was ready. I handed the keys to the house to the Richardsons, who were thrilled to be able to move in so quickly. They planned to move in the next day, Friday, exactly in time for Isabella and her husband to arrive. I walked around the house one last time, saying goodbye to each room. The bedroom where Veronica and I had spent so many nights discussing our day before bed. In the study, where I'd written most of my books. In the kitchen, where Veronica experimented with recipes on those rare days when she had time to cook. On the terrace where Isabella and I once spent an entire night watching a meteor shower when she was 10. Those were good memories, but they were overshadowed by what happened next. The slow disintegration of our family, Veronica's death, the estrangement with my daughter. Maybe by renting out the house, I could make a fresh start. No illusions about rebuilding a relationship with Isabella, but create a new life for myself. Go back to teaching, which I've always loved, to travel, as Veronica, and I had always planned for retirement, maybe even find a new relationship, though the thought still felt like a betrayal to Veronica. As I left the house, I left a note on the kitchen table for the Richardsons with a few tips about the house, where the main water tap was, how the heating system worked, which plants in. The garden needed special care. I'd also left a bottle of champagne in the fridge, a little welcome gift. Getting into the car, I took one last look at the house. The sun was setting, painting its walls a golden color. At that moment, my phone vibrated again. Another message from Isabella. "Dad, we're leaving tomorrow morning. Please, remember to leave. Your keys with Mrs. Campbell. I'm so excited. Hayden can't wait to see the house." I didn't reply. Instead, I started the engine and pulled onto the road leading back to Boston, leaving behind the house and everything it symbolized, my dreams, my losses, my mistakes. The 3-hour drive gave me time to think about what I was doing. Part of me felt guilty. Had I been too harsh? Was I repeating the mistakes of the past when I chose petty revenge over open conversation? But another part of me knew it wasn't petty revenge. This was a necessary breakup, an end to a toxic relationship that was hurting us both. Isabella had used me for years, manipulated me, lied about me to her husband. Perhaps this shock to discover that the house she thought was rightfully hers has been rented out for a year will make her reflect on her behavior, or at least realize that I'm not a Willis puppet willing to dance to her tune. When I arrived at my Boston apartment, I unpacked the bare essentials and collapsed into bed, emotionally, exhausted. Tomorrow, Isabella and her husband would arrive at the house and find the Richardson family there. What would happen then? I didn't know. Perhaps she would be furious. She might try to contact me demanding an explanation. She might even threaten to sue even though she had no legal claim to the house. But whatever happened, I was ready. I had made my choice, and now I had to live with its consequences. The call came on a Friday afternoon as I was sorting through books in my Boston apartment, trying to create some semblance of order among the boxes and suitcases. I hadn't expected this call, though I must admit some part of me had anticipated it. "Professor Prescott." Oliver Richardson's voice sounded calm, but with a touch of tension. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but we've had a bit of a situation." I set aside the book I was holding, a first edition of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, a gift from colleagues for my 60th birthday. "What's wrong, Mr. Richardson?" "A woman who claims to be your daughter appeared at the gate of the house," he answered. "There's a man with her. They are quite insistent in their desire to enter. They say they have an arrangement with you to stay here for 2 weeks. Here we go." I took a deep breath, preparing myself for what was to come. Isabella is indeed my daughter, I said. But we had no arrangement. I am fully within my rights to rent the house, and your lease is perfectly legal. I understand, Oliver replied. That's what we said. But she's upset. She wants to contact you. Threatens to call the police. It was Isabella's style to dramatize the situation, to resort to threats when she wasn't getting what she wanted. I'll be there, I decided. I'll be there in 3 hours. If they continue to make trouble, feel free to call the police yourself. I hope it doesn't come to that, Oliver said. But we'd appreciate it if you could resolve the situation. The kids are a little scared. That was the last straw. Isabella's selfish behavior was scaring the children who had just moved into their new home today. Children who were probably already stressed from another move after years abroad. I'm leaving immediately, I said, already heading for the door. The drive from Boston to Bartlett usually took about 3 hours, but I made it in 2 1/2, breaking the speed limit on empty stretches of highway. All along the way, I couldn't help thinking about the confrontation to come. What would I tell Isabella? What will I tell her husband, who probably still believes I abandoned my daughter after her mother's death? How will I explain my actions? But the closer I got to the house, the more calm and determined I became. I have done nothing wrong. This is my home, and I have every right to dispose of it as I see fit. If Isabella wanted guaranteed access to real estate on the coast, she should have maintained a better relationship with her father, or at least invited him to her wedding. When I turned onto the long driveway leading up to the house, I immediately saw 2 cars parked at the gate. One belonged to the Richardsons, the big family SUV I remembered from the day I signed the contract. The other was unfamiliar, a shiny, black sports car that screamed money and status. Had to be Hayden's car. I parked behind them and got out slowly, preparing for the storm. There were 4 people standing at the gate, Oliver and Eleanor Richardson, both with tense faces, and 2 strangers. A young woman with long dark hair gathered into an elegant bundle in a tall man in an expensive suit. Isabella, my daughter, and her new husband. I hadn't seen her in over a year, and something about her had changed. She looked older than her 32 years, tougher. Her face, so similar to Veronica's, was now tense with anger. "A daddy," she exclaimed when she saw me. "What the hell is going on?" I walked over to the group, keeping an outwardly calm face, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "Hello, Isabella," I said in an even voice. "I see you've already met the Richardsons, our new tenants." "Tenants?" She almost spat the word out. "You gave up the house without warning when you knew we were planning on honeymooning here?" "I decided the house shouldn't be empty," I answered, shifting my gaze from her to her husband. "You must be Hayden. I'm Elliot Prescott, Isabella's father. Hayden Bennett was handsome with the kind of polished beauty one often finds in financial circles. Perfect haircut, impeccable suit, confident smile. But now that smile looked strained, and there was confusion in his eyes. "Dash, Mr. Prescott," he held out his hand, which I shook. "Yeah, surprised to see you here." "I can imagine," I replied, "especially since, according to my daughter, I'd given up on her after her mother died." Hayden's face changed, a look of understanding in his eyes. He cast a quick glance at Isabella, who had gone pale. "Daddy, don't," she hissed. "Don't?" I asked. "Tell the truth, that I never gave up on you, that I was always here, always supporting you financially and emotionally as much as you let me, that you didn't invite me to your wedding and lied to your husband about me." Oliver and Eleanor Richardson looked extremely uncomfortable witnessing the family drama. "Maybe we should go into the house and leave you two," Oliver began. "No, stay," I said. "You have a right to know what you're dealing with. My daughter may try to cause you problems, and I want you to know that your lease is completely legal and will be protected." This is outrageous. Isabella raised her voice. You can't just rent out the family home without consulting me. The family home? I raised an eyebrow. The house you didn't lay claim to until you needed to impress your new husband. A house you'd already promised him as part of your inheritance. Hayden glanced at Isabella again, this time more intently. What is he talking about, Isabella? Nothing. She cut him off. Dad's just trying to divert attention from his unacceptable behavior. Suro, I'm talking about our phone conversation 3 days ago, I said, addressing Hayden directly. When Isabella told me that she told you that the house would pass. To her after Edie that it was a family home. It is, Hayden nodded, looking increasingly confused. Isabella had said that her family had owned the house for generations, and that it was hereditary. I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. Several generations. Her mother and I bought this lot 35 years ago, built the house from scratch. I own it outright, and I can do whatever I want with it, including renting it out to a deserving family for a year. Hayden's face hardened, and he turned to Isabella. Is that true? What difference does it make? She snapped at him. The house will eventually pass to me when she didn't finish her sentence. She didn't finish her sentence, but the meaning was clear. When I die. My daughter had already distributed my inheritance, had promised it to her husband, and was now furious that I had disrupted her plans. Isabella also told me that her father had disowned her after her mother's death. Hayden said, his voice growing, colder, that you were completely immersed in your work and avoided anything that reminded you of your wife, including your own daughter. That's a lie, too, I replied, feeling an old ache rise up inside. I never gave up on Isabella. I called her every week after Veronica died, offered to let her live with me, supported her financially all these years, but she chose to keep me at a distance, calling only when she needed something. Like a house for her honeymoon, Hayden added, his face now a mask of anger, but directed not at me, but at his newfound wife. That's not true, Isabel exclaimed, her voice shaking. Papa is just trying to turn you against me. Then why didn't you invite him to our wedding? Hayden asked. Sir, if he didn't reject you, if you're not in a fight, why didn't your own father attend your wedding? Isabella opened her mouth and then closed it, clearly unable to find a suitable answer. Yeah, I thought he'd be uncomfortable, she said at last, after everything that had happened. After what? Hayden insisted. You told me he'd given up on you. Now, he says that's not true. What else have you lied to me about, Isabella? I could see my daughter struggling to keep control of a situation that was quickly slipping out of her hands. Her eyes darted from me to Hayden to the Richardsons, who looked like they'd rather be anywhere but here. I wasn't making anything up, she said finally. I just simplified the situation. Simplified? Hayden let out a short, unhappy laugh. Yeah, you lied to me about your family, about your inheritance, about your relationship with your father. What else? Have you simplified, Isabella? I felt a prick of regret as I watched this scene unfold. I wanted to teach Isabella a lesson, but not ruin her marriage in the first week. Or maybe deep down that's what I wanted, to expose all her lies to show her new husband who she really was. Look, I interjected, turning to Hayden. I don't know what Isabella has told you about me or about our family, but I do know that you don't deserve to start your marriage with deceit and disappointment. Maybe you two should find another place to talk and figure out what your relationship is really built on. Hayden looked at me with a long, evaluating stare. Then he nodded. You're right, Mr. Prescott. We do need to talk, he turned to Isabella. In the car now. Hayden, you can't seriously, she started. To the car, Isabella, he repeated in a tone that broke no objection. She gave me a fiery look. You ruined everything, she hissed. You always ruin everything. No, Isabella, I answered quietly. You ruined it yourself with your lies. I just didn't let you manipulate me once again. She turned and walked toward the car, her shoulders tense with restrained rage. Hayden lingered for a moment. Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Prescott, he said. I'm sorry we met under these circumstances. I'm sorry, too, I replied sincerely. I hope you can resolve the situation in a way that's best for both of you. He nodded, then looked at the Richardsons. I apologize for the inconvenience, he said. There will be no further problems. With those words, he headed for the car where Isabella was already sitting, typing furiously into her phone. Probably another series of accusations against me. We all watched in silence as the black sports car turned and sped down the driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust. Well, Oliver, Richardson said after a long pause. That was intense. I apologize, I said, feeling suddenly tired. I didn't realize the situation would take such a turn. Don't apologize, Eleanor said softly. Family relationships can be difficult. We'll understand that. I looked at them, these kind, reasonable people who'd gotten caught up in my family drama, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Thank you for understanding, I said, and for not calling the police. We're glad it was relatively peaceful, Oliver said. But are you sure your daughter won't cause us any problems in the future? I wondered. Knowing Isabella, she could hold a grudge and seek revenge, but legally there was nothing she could do. The lease is completely legal, I assured them. The house belongs to me alone, and Isabella has no rights to it. If she tries to bother you again, contact me immediately, and I'll resolve the problem. They nodded, still looking a little worried. Look, I added, I'll be staying in town for the night in a local hotel, just to be on the safe side. If Isabella comes back or tries to contact you, call me and I'll come over immediately. That seemed to reassure them. Thank you, Professor Prescott, Oliver said. We appreciate your concern. Would you like to come in for a cup of tea? Eleanor suggested. You've come a long way. I smiled, touched by the suggestion. These people had just witnessed one of the most unpleasant scenes of my life, and instead of keeping their distance, they were offering me hospitality. Thank you, but I think I'll pass, I replied. I think we'll need a little time to recover from the incident. But I appreciate the offer. We exchanged a few more pleasantries, and then I got into my car and drove away, watching in the rear-view mirror as the Richardsons entered the house, my house, which was now their home for at least a year. I went to the only decent hotel in Bartlett, a small family-run hotel overlooking the harbor. After checking in and going up to my room, I sat by the window, looking out to sea and thinking about what had just happened. I had expected Isabella's anger. I had expected accusations and perhaps threats, but I hadn't anticipated that Hayden would react so violently to the discovery of his new wife's lies. I hadn't anticipated that their marriage would be jeopardized in the first week. Part of me felt satisfied. Isabella had gotten what she deserved. She had lied to her husband, manipulated me, and now faced the consequences of her actions. But another part of me, the part that was still a father despite everything, felt sadness and regret. How had we gotten to this point? How had my little girl that I had once held in my arms turned into a woman willing to lie about her own family for status and material possessions? Maybe I really had failed her. Maybe my constant absence from her childhood, my emotional detachment, my emphasis on material success taught her to value things more than relationships. Maybe I was the one who'd created the monster, and now I was punishing her for something I'd taught myself. My phone rang, interrupting my musings. Isabella's number. I hesitated, but then decided to answer it. No more hiding. Yes, Isabella, I said, preparing myself for a flood of anger. But instead, I heard quiet sobs. You ruined everything, she said through her tears. Hayden wants an annulment. He says he can't trust me, that I lied to him from the beginning. I closed my eyes, feeling a mixture of guilt and annoyance. You did lie to him, Isabella. And to me, too, and maybe even to yourself. I just wanted to make him proud of me, she exclaimed. I wanted him to think I came from a good family with a decent inheritance, not the daughter of a father who always put work before family. Her words hit me harder than I expected. Was this really how she saw me? As someone for whom work had always come first? Isabella, I said, quietly, I've loved you from the first day of your life. Yes, I have worked hard. Yes, I missed many important moments, but not because I didn't love you, but because I wanted to provide you with a better life. A better life. Her voice rose. A better life is when Dad comes to the school plays, when he attends the prom, when he knows the names of your friends, when he doesn't miss his daughter's own birthday party because of a conference in another country. Every word she said was like a stabbing blow because she was right. I missed all those moments and many others. You're right, I admitted. I have failed you in many ways, and I regret it more than you can imagine. But that doesn't excuse your lies, Isabella. Not to me, not to Hayden. She continued to cry, and every sob echoed in my heart. In spite of everything, she was still my daughter, and I still loved her. What do I do now? She finally asked, her voice so young, so vulnerable. First of all, be honest, I answered. With Hayden, with myself, with me. If your marriage is based on lies, it has no future. If Hayden loves the real you, not the image you've created, you have a chance to make things right. She was silent for a long moment, and all I could hear was her ragged breathing. You're right, she said finally. But I don't know if he can forgive me. That's for him to decide, I replied. But the truth is always the best foundation for any relationship, Isabella, even if it's painful. Like the fact that you rented out the house knowing we were planning to honeymoon there. There's that accusatory tone in her voice again. I admit, it was my way of teaching you a lesson, I said. Maybe not the most mature on my part, but after our conversation, when I found out that you lied to Hayden about me, that you'd already promised him my house as part of your inheritance, I just couldn't let it go on. You could have just told me. Her voice got harder. You could have just said no. Would you have listened? I asked. Or would you have just kept manipulating and pushing until you got what you wanted like you'd been doing all these years? Silence. Then I didn't manipulate you. You didn't? I chuckled bitterly. What do you call those rare calls that always ended with a request for money or a favor? What do you call calling me after a year of silence, informing me that you got married without me, and demanding the keys to my house? Silence again. Yeah, I didn't think of it that way, she said finally. I don't know how to communicate with you any other way. The words hurt, but there was a truth in them that I couldn't deny. Then maybe Webbeth need to learn, I said softer. Maybe we need to try to build a real relationship based on honesty and mutual respect, if that's what you want. I don't know what I want, she replied. Right now, I just want to save my marriage. Then start with the truth, I advised. Everything else can wait, she sighed, and I heard years of pain and frustration in that sigh. Okay, she said. I'll give it a try. Good luck. Isabella, I said. I'm sorry it had Toby this way that we've gotten to this point. Me too, she said quietly. Bye, Daddy. She hung up, and I was alone in the hotel room staring out the window at the ocean. The same ocean that washed upon the shore outside my house where another family now lived. The same ocean that Isabella was seeing now wherever she was. Perhaps in the car with Hayden trying to save her marriage, or in some hotel alone and in tears. I didn't know what the future would bring, whether Isabella would be able to fix her marriage, whether we would ever be able to repair our relationship. But I did know one thing. Today the masks were ripped off and the truth, however painful, was exposed underneath. and maybe that was the first step to something better, or at least something more honest. I spent another night in a hotel in Bartlett after our confrontation with Isabella, just in case there was any further trouble with the Richardsons. To my relief, the phone was silent. Neither the new tenant's nor my daughter bothered me, and I was finally able to sleep. Though the dreams were restless, scraps of memories mixed with images of last night's scene at the gates of my former home. In the morning, I called Oliver Richardson to make sure everything was all right. "Everything is calm, Professor," he assured me. "No visits, no calls." The children were settling in. Sophie had taken to the terrace for her art classes. Somehow this agreed with my idea of justice. The house I'd built with Veronica was supposed to be filled with family life, not empty most of the year or a stage set for my ungrateful daughter's honeymoon. After breakfast at a local cafe, I got in my car and headed back to Boston. The drive gave me time to think about what had happened and what lay ahead. Isabella was furious. Understandably so, but her marriage was already coming apart because of the lies she told Hayden. Was my role in this justified? I didn't know, but what's done is done. My apartment in Boston greeted me with silence and semi-darkness. After the spacious house on the coast with its panoramic windows and ocean view, the city apartment seemed cramped and impersonal. But it was mine, and here I could start a new chapter of my life. I spent the rest of the day unpacking and trying to create some semblance of order. Books to the shelves, clothes to the closet, kitchen utensils to the drawers. I put Veronica's pictures all over the apartment, on the desk, on the bookshelves, on the bedside table. Her presence always gave me strength even after she left. By evening, I was physically exhausted, but my head remained clear. I ordered food from the Chinese restaurant across the street and opened the bottle of wine I'd brought from home, the special Cabernet that Veronica and I had bought on our last trip to Napa 3 months before her diagnosis. I was just pouring myself. The first glass when the phone rang. Isabella's number. I sighed but decided to answer it. Ignoring the problem wouldn't make it go away. "Yes, Isabella," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "You have to cancel the lease," she said without preamble. Her voice was cold and businesslike, no trace of last night's tears. "I just talked to a lawyer. You had no right to rent out the family home without consulting me." I took a sip of wine, gathering my thoughts. "It's not a family home in the legal sense, Isabella," I replied calmly. "It belongs to me and me alone. Your mother left her share to me in her will. You have no legal rights to the property. I am the daughter and heiress," her voice rose. "I have a say in what happens to the family property." "No, you don't." I remained calm, though I could feel my irritation beginning to boil over. Not in this case. I am the rightful owner of the house, and I can do with it as I see fit. Rent it out, sell it, remodel it. Any competent attorney will tell you the same thing. Silence on the other end of the line, then. Then I'll contest Mom's will. I'll say you manipulated her when she was sick. It was so absurd, so insulting that I felt a wave of anger rising in me. Your mother made a will 5 years before she was sick. Isabella, I said, barely controlling my voice. It was notarized with 2 witnesses. And by the way, she left you all her jewelry and a substantial amount of money, which you spent in the 2 years after her death. So don't talk to me about manipulation. Silence again. I could almost see Isabella mentally going over her options, trying to find another angle of attack. Sue, this is wrong, she said finally. You knew we were planning to honeymoon there. You did it on purpose to hurt me? Yes, I admitted. I did it on purpose after I found out that not only did you not invite me to your wedding, but you lied to your husband about me. After you called me for the first time in a year to demand my house keys as if it was your right. You ruined my marriage, she screamed. No, Isabella, I countered. Your marriage was destroyed by your own lies. I just wouldn't let you continue to manipulate me and use my property to support those lies. I heard her take a deep breath, as if trying to hold back tears or anger. Hayden wants an annulment, she said quietly. He says she can't trust me after everything he's learned. I felt a prick of guilt despite all my irritation. As angry as I was at Isabella, I didn't want her to suffer. I'm sorry, I said, and it was the truth. But maybe it's better to end the relationship now if it's based on a lie than to continue living a lie for years. You were always so damn righteous, she hissed. Always knew best. But you're not flawless, Daddy. You've lied and manipulated, too. You just did it under the guise of caring about family, about our future. Her words hit me deeper than I expected because there was some truth to them. I did often use work and taking care of the future as an excuse for my absence. I don't deny my mistakes, I said. I wasn't the best father. I missed too many important moments in your life, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. But I never lied to you, Isabella. I never manipulated you. I just did what I thought was right at the time. And now you think it's right to ruin my life? Her voice trembled. I think it's right to protect myself from further manipulation, I replied. And I hope it makes you think about your actions and their consequences. You will regret this, she said, and her voice became cold and hard. I will sue you. I'll tell everyone what you're really like. Do what you want, Isabella, I interrupted her. But know that legally you have no rights to the house, and if you try to besmirch my name or bother the Richardsons, I'll be forced to defend myself with every means at my disposal. Normally I'd give in to Isabella, try to avoid conflict, give her what she wanted just to maintain some semblance of a relationship. But something in me had changed. Maybe it was the moment of epiphany at the gates of the house, when I saw how my daughter had lied. To her husband, how she had used me and my property for her own ends. You'll be sorry, she repeated and hung up. The next few days passed in relative peace. I continued to organize the apartment, trying to make it feel more like home. I contacted my old faculty at Harvard and inquired about the possibility of teaching as a visiting professor. The dean was delighted to hear from me and offered a course in behavioral economics next semester. On the fourth day after our confrontation with Isabella, I received an email from my former colleague and friend, Richard Kingsley. We hadn't spoken in years, but we had once been close. He was one of the few people who had supported me after Veronica's death. Elliot, I hope this letter finds you in good health. I ran into your daughter at the Museum of Fine Arts recently. She was organizing some kind of exhibition there. She mentioned that you had a falling out over a house on the coast. I don't know the details and don't want to intrude, but she seemed upset. If you need to talk, I'm here. Richard. I stared at that letter for a long time. So Isabella had really started to spread her version of events. I wondered what exactly she had told Richard, that I had cruelly denied her access to the family home, that I had ruined her marriage with my pettiness. I decided to answer honestly but briefly. Richard, thank you for your concern. Yes, Isabella and I did have a serious disagreement. She didn't invite me to her wedding and then demanded the keys to the house for her honeymoon. I decided to rent the house out for a year instead. Unfortunately, this led to a conflict with her new husband, who it turns out was misled about our marital situation. Elliot, I hit send and leaned back in my chair. It felt weird to lay out the whole situation in a few sentences. A complicated family. Drama reduced to a paragraph of text. Richard's reply came an hour later. Elliot, it sounds really complicated. Isabella didn't go into detail, but she did mention that her husband is very upset. It looked like their honeymoon had turned into a crisis meeting. She didn't look her best, to be honest. I'll be on campus next Thursday if you want to meet for lunch. Richard, so Isabella and Hayden were still together, at least formally, but a crisis meeting instead of a honeymoon didn't sound too reassuring for a young couple. I felt a pang of guilt. Had I gone too far in my desire to teach my daughter a lesson? But then I remembered the way Hayden had looked at Isabella when he'd found out about her lie. It wasn't the look of a man whose love could easily survive such a betrayal. It was the look of a man who felt cheated, used. Wednesday night, I received another letter, this time from Caroline Duval of the real estate agency. Professor Prescott, I hope you are doing well. I am writing to let you know that I received a call from your daughter. She was interested in the details of the lease agreement with the Richardson family and the possibility of terminating it early. I did not, of course, give her any information as the agreement is confidential and she is not a party to it. However, I feel it is necessary to alert you to her interest. I would also like to assure you that the contract is robust and cannot be terminated without good legal grounds, which at this time do not exist. Sincerely, Caroline Duval. So Isabella didn't give up her efforts to get the house back. She went directly to the real estate agent, hoping to find a loophole in the contract. It was predictable, but still disappointing. He thanked Caroline for the warning and assured her that I was not going to cancel the contract under any circumstances. I then contacted Oliver Richardson to warn him of any further possible attempts by Isabella to cause trouble. "Don't worry, Professor," he replied. "We've already received several calls from your daughter. She posed as your attorney or as a representative of a real estate agency. We, of course, did not fall for these tricks." I felt a mixture of shame and anger. Isabella had stooped to outright deception, trying to trick the Richardsons for information, or perhaps even intimidate them. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't expect her to go this far." "We realize it's not your fault," Oliver replied generously. "Family relationships can be complicated, but maybe you should talk to her directly." He was right. Of course, avoidance didn't solve the problem. It only postponed the inevitable. Sooner or later, I would have to talk to Isabella, try to find some kind of solution. The next day, I met Richard at the faculty club at Harvard. It was strange to return to the place where I had spent most of my professional life now as a guest. "You look good, Elliot," Richard said, shaking my hand. "Sunam, the pension is clearly doing you good." "I'm not sure it's retirement," I said with a smile. "More like a rebuilding." We ordered lunch and exchanged the usual pleasantries. Then, inevitably, the conversation turned to Isabella. "I met her at the museum by chance," Richard said, sipping his wine. "She was organizing some kind of contemporary art exhibition. She looked tense. When he asked about you, she seemed reluctant to talk at first, but then she mentioned that you'd had a fight about the house on the coast." "That's an oversimplification," I replied. "But yes, the house is at the heart of the conflict, or rather her expectation that she could use it as she pleased without regard for my wishes or rights." I briefed him on the situation, Isabella's call after a year of silence, her demand for the keys for the honeymoon, my decision to rent the house, the confrontation that followed. "Hayden seems like a reasonable person," Richard said when I was done. But I'd only seen them together briefly at the museum. They looked tense, talking quietly but intensely. At first I thought it was just work stress, but now I realize it was more serious than that. "She called me yesterday," I said. "Said Hayden wanted an annulment, that he couldn't trust her after everything he learned." Richard shook his head, harsh. "But given the circumstances, perhaps it's for the best. Better to break off a relationship based on lies in the beginning than to continue living a lie for years." I smiled, recognizing my own words to Isabella. That was exactly what I had said to her, but I admit I felt guilty. If I hadn't arranged this confrontation outside the house, perhaps they would have been able to resolve their problems more privately. Richard shook his head. "Don't blame yourself, Elliot. You didn't force Isabella to lie to your husband. You simply prevented her from continuing to lie. There is a difference, and it's a significant one." I nodded, grateful for the encouragement. We continued dinner, discussing more pleasant topics, new research in behavioral economics, the possibility of my returning to teaching, plans for the future. When I got home, there was a message waiting. For me, from Isabella. "Hayden has moved out. Filed for an annulment. Hope you're happy." I stared at those words, feeling a mixture of emotions. Regret, guilt, but also a strange relief. The situation had reached its logical conclusion. The lies had been exposed. The consequence had come. Now perhaps we could all move on towards a more honest relationship or ending it altogether. I didn't respond to Isabella's message, not because I didn't care for her, but because I knew in her current state she would take any word I said as an attack or as hypocrisy. It was better to give her team space to think about what had happened. In the end, I realized a simple truth. My daughter had never been interested in me as a person. To her, I was a source of finance, status, real estate. Perhaps this was partly my fault. I too often took the easy way out, offering money instead of time, material goods instead of emotional support. But that didn't excuse her manipulations and lies. I sat at the window of my Boston apartment, looking out at the cityscape and thinking about the future, about the possibility of starting over, not just with Isabella, if she was ever ready for a real relationship, but with myself. Perhaps it was time to stop living in the past, to stop defining himself through loss and regret. Perhaps it was time to find new meaning, new connections, a new life. 6 months flew by unnoticed. Winter was replaced by spring, then came summer. My life took on a new rhythm, a new direction. I returned to teaching at Harvard, first as a guest lecturer and then as a part-time adjunct professor. My course on behavioral economics was popular, and I found that I enjoyed being in an academic environment again, leading discussions with students, many of whom were smart enough to ask provocative questions. The apartment in Boston stopped feeling like a temporary shelter and began to feel like home. I arranged books, bought new furniture, and hung paintings I brought from my home on the coast. Every morning I drank coffee on the small balcony looking out over the cityscape and thought about how strangely my life had turned. I hadn't heard from Isabella in almost 4 months. After that series of angry texts, threats of a lawsuit, and the last notice that Hayden had filed for an annulment, there had been silence. At first I was worried despite everything that had happened between us. She was my daughter after all. But then I calmed myself with the thought that in the age of social media and instant communication, it's not easy to disappear without a trace. If something serious happened to her, I would know. I occasionally checked her social media page, even though she had long ago removed me from her friends. What was publicly available said that she was still working at the gallery, organizing exhibitions, and had an active social life. She smiled in photographs, but to me, who had known her all my life, the smile seemed strained. There was no mention of Hayden, no photos together, no statuses about married life, not even the wedding ring on Isabella's finger in recent pictures. It seems that the annulment of the marriage had indeed taken place. I often wondered if I had done the right thing. Had I reacted too harshly to her demand for the keys to the house? Was I too abrupt in severing a relationship that, though toxic, was still the only familial bond I had? But then I thought back to all the years of manipulation, all the situations, where Isabella had used me for her own purposes and then discarded me when I was no longer needed. I remembered how she'd lied to her husband about me, how she'd portrayed me as a monster who'd abandoned her own daughter, and realized that my decision had been the right one, albeit a painful one. News came regularly from the Richardsons. They loved the house on the coast. The children were adjusting to the news cool. Oliver had been promoted in the diplomatic corps. I was glad the house was full of life and happiness, not empty for most of the year as it had been when I was there. The rental income allowed me to live comfortably without worrying about finances. I could finally afford to travel, something Veronica and I had always planned to do in retirement, but never had the time because of her illness. I visited Italy, France, Japan, not as a tourist rushing from one attraction to the next, but as a traveler allowing myself to take in the atmosphere of a place, its culture and history. And then exactly 6 months after that scene at the gate of the house came a letter from Isabella, not an electronic one, but aerial paper one mailed to the address of my apartment in Boston. I stared at the envelope, at her neat handwriting, and felt a strange mixture of emotions, curiosity, weariness, remnants of resentment. a spark of hope. Finally, I opened it and began to read. Dear Dad, I thought for a long time before writing this letter. Pride prevented me from taking the first step, from admitting my mistakes. But the last 6 months have made me rethink a lot of things. You probably already know that Hayden and I are no longer together. The marriage was annulled 3 months ago. He couldn't forgive me for lying to him. Not about you, not about the house, and not about so many other things that came out after our confrontation at the gate. I realize now that you were right. I was using you, used your possessions, your status, your willingness to help me, and never gave you anything in return, not even basic respect. These last few months have been difficult. Not only did I lose my husband, but I lost my job at the gallery. It turns out that Hayden was a close friend of the owner, and after our breakup, my position there became uncomfortable. I'm trying to start over to open my own little gallery, but it requires funds I don't have. I know I have no right to ask you for help after everything that's happened, but you're the only person I can turn to. I need startup capital for the gallery. Not too much, just $50,000. I'll pay you back every penny as soon as the business is profitable. I'd also like to rebuild our relationship. I miss you, Dad. I miss our conversations, your advice, even your lectures on financial responsibility. I realize that family is the most important thing we have. Please let me know if you are willing to meet and discuss this. I hope it's not too late to start over. Love, Isabella. I read the letter several times trying to make sense of my feelings. Part of me wanted to believe in Isabella's sincerity, in her desire to start over, to repair our relationship. But the other part, the more cynical part, saw the letter as another attempt at manipulation. I need startup capital for me gallery. That was the real reason for the letter. Not remorse, not a desire to mend the relationship, but financial necessity. Isabella had lost her job, lost her husband and his financial resources. And now she remembered. Her father, the one person who had always been willing to give her money, no matter what. I put the letter aside and walked to the window. The city life was bustling below. People were hurrying about their business. Cars were moving in the traffic. Street musicians were playing for passers-by. Life went on despite personal dramas and disappointments. Perhaps Isabella had indeed changed. Perhaps those 6 months had made her rethink her behavior, her values. But then why is it that the first thing she mentions after apologizing is asking for money? Why didn't she just offer to meet, to talk, to try to rebuild trust without the financial overtones? I remembered all our previous reconciliations. How after another quarrel, she called, apologized, said she missed me, and then almost in the same conversation asked for money for rent, for a new exhibition, for a trip. And I always gave, hoping that this time would be different, that this time our relationship would be real, based on mutual respect and care, not financial dependence. But it never happened. After receiving the check, Isabella would disappear for months until a new financial need arose, and the cycle repeated itself over and over again. I sat down at my desk and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. I started to write a response, but after a few sentences I stopped, crumpled the sheet, and threw it away. Then I pulled out another, and tried again. And again I stopped. What could I say to Isabella that I did not believe in the sincerity of her remorse? That I saw her letter as just another attempt to get money? That I no longer wanted to be a part of this toxic cycle? Or maybe I should have given her another chance to agree to meet, to listen to her, to try to understand if she's really changed. Offer to help. Not financially, but emotionally, professionally, parentally. I sat for a long time looking at a blank sheet of paper, and gradually I realized that I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to enter into this relationship again where I would always be the donor, emotional, financial, whatever, and Isabella would always be the recipient, where I will always doubt the sincerity of her feelings, always look for ulterior motives in her words and actions. This realization brought a strange relief. It was as if I'd finally let go of the weight I'd been carrying around for years, the weight of guilt, of responsibility, of unfulfilled hopes. I was no longer obligated. to save Isabella from the consequences of her own decisions. I wasn't obligated to be her emotional or financial support, especially when that support was not appreciated, but taken advantage of. I tucked Isabella's letter away in my desk drawer, deciding not to respond to it, not out of revenge or cruelty, but out of the realization that any response would only prolong this unhealthy cycle. Sometimes silence is the clearest answer. Sometimes a complete breakdown of communication is necessary so that both parties can move on. The next day, I met with my real estate agent, Caroline Duvall. She informed me that the Richardsons would like to renew their lease on the house for another year. "They've fallen in love with the place," she said with a smile, "and they're even willing to increase the rent if you agree to the extension." I didn't hesitate. Of course. I would. They are wonderful tenants, and I'm glad the house brings them so much joy. We discussed the details of the new agreement, and I felt satisfied that I had made the right decision. The house that I had built with Veronica, that had witnessed our happy moments, was now bringing happiness to another family, and the rental income allowed me to live comfortably and independently without worrying about my financial future. After meeting Caroline, I headed to the Harvard campus, where I had a lecture scheduled for upperclassmen. The topic was emotional economics, how feelings influence financial decisions. The irony did not escape me. The lecture was a success. The students were engaged, asking interesting questions. One of them, a young man with an inquisitive look, asked, "Professor Prescott, do you think there are situations where it is rational to make a financially disadvantageous decision for emotional reasons?" I smiled, thinking about my decision not to respond to Isabella's letter, not to give her the money she asked for, even if it meant permanently severing our relationship. "Absolutely," I replied. "Sometimes the emotional cost of maintaining certain relationships or situations is so high that financial considerations become secondary. In such cases, the most rational decision is the one that protects your emotional well-being, even if it's not financially optimal." The student nodded, satisfied with the answer. I continued the lecture, but my thoughts kept returning to the question, my own decision, and the unanswered letter. After the lecture, I went to the faculty club where I met with Richard Kingsley and several other colleagues. We discussed the latest research, academic gossip, and plans for the next semester. It was nice to be part of an intellectual community. Again, having meaningful conversations with people who shared my interests and passion for knowledge. When the conversation naturally turned to personal topics, Richard asked about Isabella. "How have you been doing? Have you had any contact since the incident?" I shook my head. "Shakura-tan," she wrote to me the other day. "She wants money to open her own gallery." "And you'll give it to her?" Richard asked bluntly. "No," I answered with a certainty that surprised even myself. "I won't." Richard nodded, neither approving nor disapproving. This must be a hard decision. Harder than I expected, I admitted, but necessary for both of us. We moved on to other topics, but that brief exchange stayed with me. Yes, the decision was hard. Yes, part of me still doubted, still fought the instinct to help my child no matter what. But the other part, the stronger part, knew it was the right choice. In the evening, I returned to my apartment, poured a glass of wine, and stepped out onto the balcony. The sun was setting, coloring the cityscape with golden tones. I thought about Isabella's letter, about my decision not to answer it, about my new life, lonely but no tempty, filled with work I loved, people I respected, opportunities I was just beginning to explore. I raised my glass in a silent toast to Veronica, who taught me how to love. To Isabella, who, despite all our problems, was a part of me. To myself, who had finally found the strength to break the toxic cycle and begin to truly live. Sometimes, the most important relationships in our lives are the ones we have to let go of, not because of a lack of love, but because of the realization that love doesn't have to mean self-sacrifice to the point of self-destruction. That true love also includes respect for oneself, for one's boundaries, for one's right to happiness and peace. I didn't know what the future would bring. Maybe one day Isabella would truly change, learn to build relationships on honesty and mutual respect. Maybe we could start over on a new basis. But if that doesn't happen, I'll be fine. I've learned to live without toxic relationships, even if those relationships were with my own daughter. The sun had finally disappeared over the horizon, leaving behind a gentle twilight. I finished my wine and returned to the apartment, feeling strangely calm. Life went on, my life, and for the first time in a long time, I was truly free from manipulation, from guilt, from endless attempts to earn the love that was supposed to be unconditional. Sometimes you need to break free from a toxic relationship, even if it means breaking up with your own daughter. Sometimes it's the only way to preserve yourself, your dignity, your right to happiness, and there's no selfishness or cruelty in that. Just a recognition that love doesn't have to cause constant pain, that healthy relationships are based on mutual respect and care, not manipulation and use. I was ready for this new chapter of my life, ready for independence, for freedom, for the opportunity to finally live for myself and not for the ghost of a relationship that existed only in my imagination. And in that readiness was not only the sadness of loss, but also the hope for something better, something real, something worthwhile.